Hello again for Read the Bible in Lockdown. Hope you're hanging in there, given all the restrictions and things like that. But I'm also glad that you have tuned in to hear from God today. May this sustain you as you persevere in trusting Jesus today. We know that we are saved by grace, that whoever we are, whatever we're like, we can receive the grace of Jesus, but Jesus saves us to transform us. And we'll see today and tomorrow about what it might look like for us to be transformed by the love of Christ. Let's check it out. Back to Colossians 3 for our reading today. Colossians 3, starting at verse 5. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices, and you have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. Here there is no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. So in this passage, we have got a whole list of things not to do in the Christian life. There's some in verse 5, there is more in verse 8, do not lie to each other. So a whole list of things that are not to be done by the Christian. But if the Bible just said, don't do these things, then the uptake on that will be low, I reckon. Just like the government saying, stay at home, don't go out, don't mingle with other people, don't have family members over to your house. Just saying those things isn't going to be enough for people to do them. It's when you get to the deeper reasons of, keeping everyone safe or not bringing COVID to your grandparents or things like that. That's when some of these rules start to take traction. And of course, as we've seen from the response in New South Wales, we also need the Holy Spirit to be obedient to the Lord. But let's just have a look at some of the reasons for not doing these things. This passage just doesn't list what not to do. It tells you why, and let those things ruminate in your heart so that you may obey this teaching here. Firstly, let me point out, it says put to death. That is super strong language. We're to kill off these things. Just like you might want to kill off all the insects or spiders in your house, these things need to be killed off. And why? Well, it's whatever belongs to your earthly nature. So here's the first reason. Here's what we're to put off first. It's what belongs to our earthly nature. Because do you remember back in 2 verse 10 says, your whole self ruled by the flesh was put off when you were circumcised by Christ. So here we have our old self. Remember last time we had died to Christ. And so if we've died to Christ, we're to put to death these things, because our old self has been put to death. And so whatever belongs to your earthly nature, that is your old self. So it's part of who you are, why we are to put to death these things, because they belong to who we formerly were, not our new identity. That's one reason. Here's another reason. Verse 6, because of these, the wrath of God is coming. All these vices are all things that God detests, that God hates, because they're not how God designed the world to be. They're not how God designed people to relate to one another. And so he is rightly bringing his righteous judgment, his wrath on these things. And so if these are the things that are going to be consumed in God's judgment on the last day, then we'd have nothing to do with them. Another reason, verse 7, you used to walk in these ways. So they're part of our, part of our old life, in the life you once lived. And so they're our former life. That's why we're not to do them. And again, reinforced in verse 9, you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self. So these things don't belong in you, because it's not who you are. And because of what's happened to you, your old, sinful, earthly self, that's ruled by the flesh, ruled by sinful desires, that's been taken off you. That's been put to death spiritually. Now, of course, we're not perfected yet. You can see we're being renewed by God into the image of God. It's an ongoing process. We're being renewed. So we're not going to be complete yet. But spiritually, these things and our old self have been taken away from us. And so just like our old selves have been put to death, we're to put to death whatever belongs to our old self. So with those reasons, it's no longer who we are. We remember what's been done to us. Our old self's been put away. The wrath of God is coming on these things. Put them to death. Put these things to death. And these are, reading over this again and reflecting on it, this is relevant for lockdown, isn't it? So we're to put to death, firstly, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires. They're all kind of the things around the misuse of sex. God's design for sex is to strengthen a marriage. That's what sex is for. And so to use sex in a different way dishonors God and is bad for us. And so maybe that's what you need to be putting off. When we're stuck at home on screens all day, is pornography a factor in your life? Do you recognize that belongs to your old self? And the wrath of God is coming on that. We've seen, with all the contact tracing, we've seen people getting caught out in affairs or with sex workers or things like that. Is sexual immorality, is lusting over images on a screen, or any sort of sexual impurity, is that what you need to put off? Greed, which is idolatry. Now, idolatry is worshipping something that is part of what God has made, like gold or trees or beach houses, rather than God himself. And so are we worshipping, are we greedy through this time and not being generous? Or do we need to put off the more relational things such as anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language? When we're all stuck at home with our families 24/7, how much is the anger and rage boiling in on you? How much is the malice and slander happening, either towards your family or even online or to your colleagues as you Zoom in meetings, or filthy language ruminating in you? These things are to be put to death. They're not to be part of God's people because they're not who we are. Similarly, do not lie to each other. Again, all these things are the things that we're to put to death. We can only do that by the grace of the Holy Spirit, but let's reflect on the reasons why. They're not who we are. They belong to our old self. The wrath of God is coming on these things. Let's not live, friends, with these in our lives. We're to continually put them to death with the confidence that God is renewing us in the knowledge of Him, being renewed more and more to be like God in the way that we live.